Started. Welcome, everybody. So glad to have you here for the third of the 5 events in this Future of Work mini webinar series. Wayne, if you were with the earlier sessions, Wayne did 2 sessions with you last week. I'm with you today, and I'm with you next week, and then we're together for a live Q&A to finish this up. And if you joined us, if you signed up since it started, never fear. The recordings will be available to you. I'm going to mute all of you just because the group is growing, and that's what I'm going to do. You can certainly unmute yourself if you want to say something along the way, but largely we'll use the chat for that engagement over the next little bit. Let me tell you a little bit about me if you don't know, but not much. So my name is Kevin Eikenberry. I'm the Chief Potential Officer of the Kevin Eikenberry Group. I co-founded the Remote Leadership Institute. I have written a whole number of books, including a couple pretty relevant these days called The Long Distance Leader, and most recently, The Long Distance Teammate. I've been leading a remote team for a decade, and so hopefully maybe that helps. And because of this work that we've been doing around remote work, we're getting asked a lot about the future of work, and I've been spending a tremendous amount of time in that area. And as the email that I got earlier today said, so all of the work that you guys do with remote leadership and remote teams, can that help with hybrids? And of course, the answer to that is 100%. And so I'm happy to spend the next 30 minutes or so with you, sharing some of the things that we're learning, sharing some of the things we're thinking about, and hopefully it will help you in your organizations. So really 3 goals for this short time that we have together to help you plan your future of work decision-making approach. And if I said there's only one goal, that'd be it. I want to help you think about how are we going to decide, and help you build a plan once you decide that can gain the commitment of folks so that you can have greater success. And really that sets the table for how the organization can be successful, not just 3 or 4 months from now, but for the long term. And you'll hear more about why I think that's all important and what that all means here in just a few minutes. Okay, so the question is, where are we now? Well, we're now moving past the place of being forced into remote work, right? A lot of us were told, thou shalt send everybody home because you can't be gathering in offices anymore. So we're moving past that. We're starting to see the light at the end of that tunnel. Organizations are starting to make decisions. Just about an hour ago, I read that GM has made their decision about and communicated about what's going to happen. Here's their plan. Work appropriately. 2 words is what Mary Barra, their CEO, said earlier today. And so all of us now have choices to make. That's why we're here, to think about the choices that we have to make about what's work going to look like moving forward. Are we bringing everybody back? Are we leaving everybody where they are? Are we having something in between, some sort of hybrid? And so we're going to talk about those choices. And I believe that honestly, right now, we're at a tipping point. We're at a tipping point of when people are starting to say that I'm going to have to make those decisions. But I also think there's a more important tipping point that I'll get to in just a second. But before I do that, I just want to get your thoughts for just a second. There's a lot of us and we've got a short time to get there, but I really do want to hear and have you do this in the chat real quickly. What are your biggest concerns and worries as you look forward into this, by definition, unknown future? What are your worries and concerns? I'd love to hear them, and maybe I can address some of them as we go. So I'm going to stop talking for just a second while you have the chance to type and tell us in the chat what your concerns and worries are at this juncture. So team trust, thank you, Laurel. And not that I'm thanking you for having a lack of trust, but for sharing, not being able to keep things that work, that we've learned to work, worried that we're going to go backward, perhaps. Maybe those are my words. Being forced, some are being forced into the office, feeling that they're forced. I think that's what I'm hearing there. Safety and job security seems to be related to that. Some people are going to always be worried about job security. I would seem to think that if we've made it this long, hopefully they're not worried about that anymore, but maybe they are. And if folks in your organization are worried about that, we need to be addressing that. Wellness, the lack of collaboration. Hello, Wendy Hanks. Treating everyone equitably. So a lot of the questions that you're asking are about what it's going to be, right? Julia says employees not wanting to return even if it's hybrid. And maybe that's related to some of the health or the safety issues, not being offered a choice, whatever that choice might be. Okay, just being said, this is what it will be. In other words, worried that it's going to go like the last time, like we're not going to have any input into it, right? Being forced to go back to normal, which was not the most efficient way. Ageism and returning to the workforce. I'd love to know more about that if we had time, which I don't know that we do. But I don't love what your concerns are. I love that you shared them. And I love that I think what we're going to talk about is going to help you think about and address those. Now, I don't know where you sit in your organizations, right? Some of you may be at senior leadership roles from what I just read there. Some of you maybe aren't. You're a manager or a leader in the middle somewhere. I think what we're going to talk about is going to apply regardless. Maybe some of what we're going to talk about, you'll want to be sharing with others to help them think about as well. I said a minute ago that I think that we're at a tipping point. I'll say now what I've been saying now for 2 or 3 weeks, and that is that I believe that we are at a moment that matters. Because now we're going to make some new decisions. And the decisions that we're going to make are going to have long-term implications. And the decisions that we have to make are all about what does the future of work what's it going to be? What do we want our future of work to be? And I understand that that's the question that people are asking. I was in a workplace yesterday, recording some videos. There were very few people there. And I asked them what their plan was. And the question was, I don't know, but I sure wish I did. And I think that's the voice of many, many employees saying, I just wish I knew what it was. And so I think because this is a moment that matters so much, that the right first question, and you may have read something, I wrote about this just this morning, that the right first question isn't actually what is the future of work. I believe the right first question is, how will we determine the future of work? That it's not just about the what, but about the how, the process that we come to get there. Notice how many things you heard or read in the chat, if you were reading along, that said people worried about not being offered a choice, people worried about being forced, people worried about what the implications of all this will be. Well, if people are in that spot now, are they as effective as they could be? No. When whatever this comes about to be are they going to be as committed to it? Probably not. And if this doesn't go well in terms of the how much more likely might some of those people be starting to look for something else down the road? I think all of these things, that's just a small part of why this is so important. And so really what we're going to talk about for the next 22 minutes or so is the how we get there. There's lots of ways to do it. But I want to talk about there's lots of answers to the what. The question is, how are we going to make that decision for our organization? I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to help you think about how. So what is your role in this? Well, the first two things are the things we're going to talk about today. And the first two things are the roles that I think all of us have right now. Number one is to determine or to create the visions, the plan, the policies of what the future of work will be. But also to leverage whatever choices are made to help the organization grow and succeed for the long term. Now, once you get further into a transition, into the change, there's a support role and there's a role model role. We're not going to get at any of that today. That goes beyond the scope of what we can do and what I promised you on the 20th of April, 2021. So here's the future that you're all facing. Number one is you're facing a change effort. This isn't just a decision. This is a change effort. And so we're going to talk about it from the context of change here in a few minutes. And let me tell you, whatever choice you make, whatever the future of your workplace is, it's likely, highly likely, that it's going to be more complex. Right? So think about it. A year and a half ago, most everyone probably worked in one place. They probably worked in the office side by side, face to face. And then we sent everybody home. So we did work in a world that looked black and white. We're all here or we're all not here. But that's not what the future looks like. This is what the future looks like. Right? And even when organizations say, well, we're going to go hybrid, there's like 100 more questions. And there's 100 more things that lead to complexity for us as a remote or hybrid leader, and for as a remote or a hybrid team member or teammate. There's just all sorts of, it's not just shades of gray, it's colors of the rainbow that we're going to have to think about. And so it's important for us to recognize that the future is going to be more complex, not less so. And that's important to realize. And because of that, because of the fact that it's a change effort, there are responsibilities that we have to make it work well and to come up with a great plan. But anytime there's change, there's opportunity. And so I hope that you leave this session encouraged, maybe with a bit of direction, but certainly encouraged to say there are opportunities here for us to have greater success moving forward. Now, if people are worried about being forced to go back to something that didn't work before, and that's what we're going to do before, that's what we're going to do in the future, or not being offered a choice, or ageism, or whatever those things are, if that's what's in people's heads, what we have to do is figure out how we get past all of that. And so the question that I'm being asked a lot right now is, okay, what are our choices, Kevin, for the future of work? And there's options in a couple of areas, and there's options about where people work and when people work. So I'm just going to talk about this a little bit, just to say that this is sort of the menu that you're going to have to choose from at some level, right? And then we're going to talk about how do we make that choice. So we're not going to really talk about the pros and cons of these choices. That's, I think, up to the individual organization or individual team to figure out. But I'm going to give you what some of those choices are. And here what some of they are. In terms of the wheres, there's the organizational choice. And that's being said there. Organization is going to decide. And some of the organizational choices will be that we're choosing for everyone to come back, or we're going to pick the jobs that must come back, or we're going to pick the jobs that can stay home, or we're going to pick the jobs that are going to be hybrid, or whatever. That's one approach, is for the organization to make decisions. The next choice is maybe sort of more the GM choice today, which is work appropriately, individual choices. You want to work from home? Go for it. I mean, as long as you're meeting your metrics, you're going to be able to choose. So that's one approach that organizations can take. Another, and some are. Another organization is some sort of flexible options where, and maybe those first two are sort of who's in, who's not. The flexible options are, hey, we're going to have some kind of hybrid, right? And maybe everyone's going to be in the office once in a while, once a week, twice a week, once a month, some recurring pattern. Maybe you're there every Tuesday and Thursday, whatever. Like, those are options that organizations can consider. And then there's hoteling, right? Everyone's going to come to the office sometimes, but you're not necessarily going to have the same desk, because we're going to have a smaller footprint, because we're not going to keep all this office space that we used to have. Since we're not all going to be here, we're going to go to a different option. And this is one of the options certainly on the table, and what we'll call hoteling. So we've got hybrid, and we've got hoteling, and then we've got what I'm going to call occasionally in person. Special events in person. Everybody's here for certain situations, once a month, once a quarter, for training. Everyone's here for the town halls, whatever that might be. And so I view this one different than flexible options, as is that we're probably all here once in a while, but the rest of the time it's something else. Okay. And then the last one is, who knows? Like, some combination of these things it could be, right? And so maybe you're going to say, we don't even care where you live. You don't want to live in the same zip code? We don't care. Like, what is that going to be? My point is, there's lots of choices, lots of things to choose from. But it's not just about the where, it's also the when. There's going to be more and more organizations with flexible work hours, 4/10s, start early, finish early. So it's almost going to be more like shift work in some organizations, where they're going to choose based on people's desires. Do they want to work early? Do they want to work late? Do they want to work a split day? Like, those things are going to be on the table for some people, and they're worth you thinking about. I'm not proposing any of them. I'm simply saying that the range of options available to you is wide. And this, at the end of the day, my friends, is more than just changing a policy. This isn't changing policies. This is an organizational change, and we must treat it as such. And I mean, there's a long workshop on leading organizational change that's not the purpose here, but I need to give you a little bit of context, right? So if you think about organizational change, there's some things that have to happen. I'll just lay them out here and then we'll talk about them. So if you want to move people to a changed state, they have to know where they're going to. There has to be a clear picture, a clear vision, a clear future state, if you will. And people have to know not only what that is, but why it matters. People have to understand why that matters and why we've picked it and what the benefits are to it. No one's going to move to change until they know what they're changing to. And if you've ever been in a situation where people say, well, we're going to change, but no one knows where we're going, all you have is chaos. Truly have chaos, right? And people not only need to know where we're going, but how we're going to get there. They need to have a picture of the steps, of the plan, of the process, not only for the organization, but for themselves. And the clearer the picture and the clearer the plan, the better chance we have. But get this, it's almost powerful when people feel ownership of it. If you really want organizational change to work, it has to feel like I'm in. The more people that I, as a leader, can get in to that plan, that I can have committed to the plan, committed to that future state, the better chance we have of success. So, simply stated, going out and creating a new policy, going out and putting 4 or 5 people in a room and coming out with a here's what our future of work looks like, has a low chance of commitment. Doesn't mean it can't get commitment, has a low chance, which means that how we get to these 3 things is critical. That's why we're spending our time today talking about how and not just what, right? I'll even give you some ways to think about getting to your what, but it's got to start with how. So when we're done, how will we know we were successful? We'll be successful when we have a clear picture of who's going to be involved, what the criteria for success is, who's going to build the plan, and we've got to think about some physical factors. So let me just walk through this just a second. If the organization is going to say who's involved as well, the senior management team is going to go off and come back and decide, well, then that's a way to do it, right? You have to decide who's going to be involved. I'm going to lead you to a place that says, I think you want more involvement than just that, depending on the size of your organization. And so if you're going to get more people involved, you have to critically think about what are the criteria? How will we know we came to the right conclusions? What are the things we're going to consider? And we'll talk about what some of those should be in a few minutes. And then who will build the plan? And I would say the more people who are going to be impacted by the plan, that are involved in the plan, the better off you'll be, right? And then if as a leadership team, you buy that idea that, hey, we want to get more involvement, then you may know some things that those folks need to understand. And that's the last bullet. Like we have one client, for example, who has already decided to move from 3 buildings or parts of 3 buildings in a major city to just 1. So if the organization, if the people involved in the changing of the plan for change need to know there's going to be less spaces than there used to be, that's going to have an impact on what our final choices are. So there may be some givens, right? Hey, the lease on this office space is going up and we're considering or have already decided to not renew it. Knowing that helps us, right? Knowing that helps us. And so if that's not profound knowledge to everyone involved, we got to make sure that those criteria are well known. So if we're going to engage some folks in coming up with this vision, then we have to start with those physical parameters that we just talked about. And then how can we get wider engagement and input? The more that we can get more people involved in one way or another, the better off we will be, the better chance we'll have. You got to make sure that everyone knows what all those factors are. And I would encourage you to start as open-ended as possible. Like if the decision's already been made that we're bringing 85% of the people back to the office, okay, then maybe we want some help with the plan, but the decision's largely already made, right? So what I'm suggesting is start as open as possible. Take that slide 3 or 4 ago and say, what's the way we want to go about doing this, right? And then in terms of the factors that must be considered, here are some of them. I believe, and this is why I don't, as a consultant, feel like it's my job to say, here's what your plan ought to be, because I don't have the answers to these questions. What's your organization's work like? Like, what are you about? What's the nature of the work? What are your current and future talent needs? How big is the organization going to need to be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? How much does that play into this? Like, how much collaboration needs to happen? Because collaboration is one of those things that we often think about as, hey, if we can get people in a physical space together, collaboration is aided. That could be true. Does that play in? Right? How often do we need the levels of collaboration that we're talking about there? What are the expectations of what people do on their jobs? And so those things need to come into play. And they're not the same in every organization. Keith says, what is the trust level? It gets at culture, right? Which we don't have time to dive into deeply here, but the trust level will help us determine how much commitment there will be or not to where we start. I'll give you this real quick on that point. If when you sent everybody home, most everyone reported that the first couple of weeks went surprisingly well. Everyone was sort of on the same, like, we got to do this. We all come together. The first 2 weeks went surprisingly well. If the fabric frayed quickly, you probably had trust issues in the organization. If you had longer success before things got harder, or if it's still going pretty well, you probably had higher levels of trust. If I could oversimplify it, that's what I'd say. And that's clearly important, right? And that could be differing greatly between teams. I mean, I know the size of the organization that Keith is in, and it's larger-ish, right? And so that's going to vary across the organization, right? And so we need to be projecting forward. What does the future look like? What do we want in the future? And that should be taken into account in terms of what decision we're making about the, quote, future of work. And then we need to think about how we're doing now, which kind of gets to Keith's point. Like, what have we learned in the last year? And we need to make sure that what we've learned that we don't lose. That came out in the chat. Someone said something about that. Being forced to go back to something that didn't work when maybe we've learned some things that have worked. If some things are working, then make sure we take those into account into whatever we decide to do moving forward, right? And are there any gaps that we're not doing very well? And maybe we want to stay in a more remote world, but it hasn't gone perfectly. Then how do we need to address those gaps? Identify any obstacles, either real ones or imagined ones, right? And then out of all of that, are there some policies that we might need to put into place? I'm not saying we might not need new policies. I'm saying it's not as simple as drafting a policy. That's really what I'm saying, right? Okay. So the third factor, and we don't have time to dive into it, is, so let's think about the work. Let's think about the context of our work in our organization. Let's think about how we're doing now and taking that into account into what we want to do in the future. And then think about the culture that you want moving forward that we don't have time to talk about, but that should play into what we decide. Right? The last several slides have been about how. Get more people involved as much as you can. Give them all of the needed information, and then let them start thinking about it using these factors. So at the end of the day, I believe that your organization can come up with the right answer for you. It won't necessarily be the same as the right answer for someone else, and that's okay, as long as you take all of this into account. Not taking all of this into account means that you must proceed with caution as to what will happen moving forward, right? So here's the thing. You can build a great plan, but success is more than a good plan. Success is about people committing to the plan. And maybe the whole point of this conversation is this slide right here. Commitment grows with ownership and input and ownership, right? So I've given you some thoughts about that. And I know there's a whole workshop about that, but I'm trying to give you some things to think about here, including these things. How much you can engage people directly in this decision depends a lot on the size of your organization and the time that you have to do it. I recognize that, right? But if we remind people of why we're here, what we are all about, it will help them make better decisions and even understand the decisions that others have made. That it's not just a whim, but it's related to why we exist, right? And so the more involvement and input we can get, the better. Maybe if your organization is big, it looks more like having some focus groups or listening sessions. And whatever you do, you can certainly engage people, have a clear implementation plan overall, but then help individuals figure out what their personal implementation plans are going to be. Oftentimes organizations are pretty good at organizational change, saying here are the big chunks of things that need to happen, but then all the other stuff we can let individuals or teams figure out how they're going to actually make that happen. Right? If you're Mary Barra at GM and today you say our strategy is work appropriately, she's basically saying I'm trusting teams to make a lot of those individual decisions. And I love that part of that, right? There's some things that I have some concerns about her point, and read what I write on LinkedIn about it in the next 24 hours, because I probably will a little bit. Overall, I love that approach because it puts a lot of the decision making where people can make those decisions for themselves, for their work, for their levels of collaboration needs, for the individual needs of folks. So have a clear implementation plan, and then clearly make sure you have outstanding processes for ongoing communication, because this is going to be hard. It's going to be complex. However well we do it, there's going to be some amount of chaos associated with it. However we do it, not everyone's going to love it. Right? What I'm trying to do is help you think about a way that will improve the commitment by definition, and then make sure that you're planning to have greater commitment moving forward. Okay. Now, we don't have a lot of time, but I have to put this slide up to say, does anyone have a specific question, something that you want to ask? You can unmute and ask it if you don't have a lot of background noise, or throw it in the chat real quick. And remember too, that Wayne and I are going to be back in a couple of weeks doing a full hour to talk about whatever you want. So you can certainly save up your questions for then if it's not overly timely. And you can challenge us then as well. But does anyone have something specific that, from what I just said, that's timely, that you need some help with? That's why I'm here. Anybody? All right. If one comes in, I'll answer. There it is. Beth says, what's an appropriate response to employees who plan to quit if forced to return to the office? Well, I think the organization has to make decisions, and maybe you'll determine that for whatever reasons, maybe for really valid reasons, that job needs to return to the office. But I think it's important that the organization knows that people are doing that. I don't think that we should let people hold the organization hostage to what the organization needs to do. And yet, if you're a leader in the middle of the organization, you are a communication conduit. And the people making the ultimate decisions need to know that people are saying that. Not as an individual HR issue, hey, Andrea's going to quit if you make her come back to the office. I'm not saying that. Now, there may be a place where that conversation needs to happen. But I'm saying that senior leaders need to understand, remember, as a leader, you are the face and the voice of your team upward. And so people need to know that. And here's what I would say. There's a whole lot of people that aren't going to say that and aren't going to quit the day you send them back. But if the way we do this or the choices that we make don't work for people, then it has long-term talent retention and talent attraction implications, right? It just does. And there may be non-negotiables. I think Mike's point is a good one. I think that we need to know if that's how people are feeling, and you need to know that there are people feeling like that, whether they're saying it or not, right? Yeah. So Amy's question says, I'm just going to answer half of this, Amy, is all I got time for. I'm going to answer the part that if you've still got leaders saying everyone's got to come back to work, I would just start by asking them one question. has this been viable for a year? And they're going to have to almost assuredly say, oh, it's viable. That's different than that's what they prefer. Like, I understand that people have personal preferences, but I think if you can get people to admit and recognize that, hey, it's at least been viable. It's at least been, I did not think it could be done, but we've figured it out. Okay. So how can we take what we've learned from there and go forward? Some leaders are going to have to let go of their just personal preferences, just like some team members are going to have to let go of their personal preferences in some cases, because it's a rainbow world. There's shades of gray. There's not a single right answer, and we're going to have to figure that out, right? The frustration of waiting for higher ups to make decisions. I think all we can do is acknowledge that within our team and help our teams be as successful as they can be given that uncertainty. Listen, we've been living with that uncertainty for a long time already. It doesn't make it any easier now, but I would just say, hey, I know we'd like to know. And the world keeps changing and they haven't decided. Maybe it's time for us to see if we can have some input into that, right? Hey, I'm already over our time. I've got to go forward. If you have to leave, I understand that it is recorded, but I want to keep us as close to the time that I promised as I can. Okay. So always you're going to have me asking you this question. Okay, what did you get from this that you're going to go use? Please figure that out and go use it, right? Because this is a moment that absolutely matters. And so because you hung in with us, and because you're diligently thinking about these things, I want to give you a couple of opportunities. And the first one is we created a product a while back called 12 Weeks to Being a Great Remote Teammate. And it certainly applies to hybrid teams as well, right? So if you want to give people the support and skills that they need once you're figuring out where we're going, or if you're in Wendy's spot and we're still hanging out in this remote world and we don't know for how much longer, and you want to give people some support and some skills, we have an ongoing blended learning solution that delivers content for 12 weeks in a variety of ways. And we've been selling that at a discount already for $99 for the 12 weeks of content. And there's volume discounts beyond that if you want to think about it for your team or for your organization. And it can be available as it was originally designed, which was in weekly and daily delivery chunks of content, small amounts to help us build new habits and skills over 12 weeks. Or we've got the Netflix binge watch version. We can get it all immediately. Watch it at your leisure, right? Emily, we're not quite as entertaining as most of the Netflix stuff. Although I've watched some stuff on Netflix that wasn't very good. So maybe we're okay, Wayne and I, in delivering this content. And if you want to think about this organizationally, we can work with you to deliver a live component that inserts one of our consultants, Wayne or I or someone, in chunks along the way. We've had some really good success in doing that in a variety of organizations, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that. But fundamentally, the content exists. You can go find it. Go to remoteleadershipinstitute.com. You can find it. You can reach out to us. You're going to get it in follow-up emails as well. But know that you can get it in volume and at a discount for your team. How else can we help? Well, maybe you've got questions about that, or maybe you've got questions about the stuff we've talked about today, or maybe you're just looking for external help in general. Well, you can send an email to Laura at kevineikenberry.com to schedule a consult with someone on our team. And she'll help sort out who the right person is for you to talk to based on what your challenges and questions are. That's completely free. Just reach out to Laura and say I was on the webinar and we'd like some help. We'd like to talk to somebody, and we'll figure out who the right person is for you and make that happen. Whether it's questions about 12 weeks, about the stuff we've talked about. And one more thing I want to say before I go, besides thank you, is that in the description of this workshop, we promised you a tool. Well, the tool to help you with all this isn't quite done yet, but I promise you, because you're registered for this whole mini series, that when the tool is ready, you'll find out about that in an email and you can click and download it for free. That's coming. It's just not ready quite yet. So there's that. Thank you all for being here very much. I'm going to be back with you next week. I think you're going to love next week. I hope that you'll love that session as well. I hope you'll join us. And if you found this one or any of the others valuable, you can still have people sign up. They can just go sign up, and we hope that they'll do that and have them join us for the last session, as well as the live Q&A at the end. So with that, I will thank you for being here. I'll encourage you all to come back and see me next week. And yes, I'm going to stay warm. It's going to snow tonight. I'm going to go home before it starts to snow. Just saying. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you all in a week. Have a great day, great week. Talk to you soon.